On the 5th of April, 1999, Andrea Michelle Reyes, just 23 months old, was abducted from her father, Carlos Reyes Couvertier, during a scheduled visitation in New Haven, Connecticut. The abduction was orchestrated by Andrea's mother, Rosa Tenorio, who had lost custody of the child but decided to take her away. For years, Andrea's father would search tirelessly for her, traveling to Mexico twice, believing that Rosa had fled with Andrea there. From a criminological standpoint, the Andrea Reyes case is a textbook example of parental kidnapping and the challenges involved in locating missing children. Parental abductions are, unfortunately, not rare, but cases like Andrea's, where the child remains missing for decades, are relatively uncommon. In criminology courses, this case would be analyzed through theories of deviance, particularly the intersection of family dynamics and criminal behavior. Law enforcement struggled with this case, particularly because international boundaries complicated the search. A deeper analysis into international law enforcement cooperation, Interpol involvement, and the role of national agencies like the Federal Bureau of Investigation or National Center for Missing and Exploited Children would be critical in understanding the global complexities surrounding the search for abducted children. In 2023, after more than 2 decades of fruitless searching, Detective Keelan Nivikoff of the New Haven Police Department decided to reopen the case. This is a classic example of how cold cases can be revived through new technologies, particularly forensic genetic genealogy. This is a developing field in forensic science that involves analyzing DNA samples to create genetic profiles that can be compared against databases of genealogical information. The breakthrough came when Nivikoff's team, in collaboration with Othram, a Texas-based biotech company specializing in forensic DNA analysis, used advanced DNA testing to trace Andrea's genetic lineage. This groundbreaking method allowed authorities to identify Andrea, now 27, living in Puebla, Mexico. From a forensic science perspective, this case highlights the growing importance of genetic genealogy in solving cold cases. Forensic genetic genealogy combines traditional forensic DNA analysis with genealogical research to create a familial connection, even if the person is not in a national DNA database. This technique has been widely credited with solving numerous cold cases, including high-profile ones like the Golden State Killer. Courses focusing on forensic science and genetic genealogy would delve deeper into the methods and techniques used here, explaining how law enforcement utilizes databases, DNA samples, and genealogy websites to link a genetic profile to possible family members and suspects. The role of publicly accessible genealogical databases in this case, such as GEDmatch, would also be discussed, shedding light on the ethical and legal implications of using such data for criminal investigations. A lesser discussed but equally important aspect of Andrea's case is the emotional and psychological toll that the kidnapping and eventual reunion have had on all involved. For Andrea's father, Carlos Reyes Couvertier, the emotional strain of losing his daughter and continuing his search for over 2 decades would have profound psychological effects, including anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder. From Andrea's perspective, the psychological effects of being raised in a different country, likely under stressful and confusing circumstances, would also have long-lasting impacts. The adoption, trauma, and identity confusion that she may experience upon learning her true origins is a topic explored in psychology courses focused on child development and trauma. Reunions after long separations can be emotionally charged and complicated, often requiring therapeutic support. Psychologists specializing in trauma and attachment theory would examine the dynamics of Andrea's potential reintegration into her biological family. These reunions often stir complex feelings, from joy and relief to confusion and grief, and the impact on familial relationships is profound. Given the time Andrea spent apart from her father, the reunion could be fraught with both positive and negative emotions, especially considering the time Andrea spent living with her abductor, who likely had an emotional influence on her development. Modern investigations into abductions also heavily rely on technology and social media. In Andrea's case, social media platforms were pivotal in raising awareness. As soon as the public learned that Andrea had been found, social media outlets amplified the story, offering widespread visibility to her case. The rapid circulation of news articles, viral campaigns, and DNA databases reflects the role that modern technology plays in reuniting families and solving cases that would have been unsolvable years ago. Courses in technology, in law enforcement, and digital forensics would analyze the utilization of these platforms. Investigators can now post detailed descriptions of missing persons and request DNA samples from the public, expanding the reach of their searches. As of now, Rosa Tenorio, Andrea's mother, remains a fugitive. Authorities in the U.S. have issued a felony arrest warrant for her, though it is believed she still resides in Mexico. The legal ramifications for Rosa are significant, as parental abduction is a serious offense, often carrying long prison sentences. A criminal law course would provide a detailed breakdown of the legal processes involved in extradition requests and the potential international legal hurdles involved in bringing Tenorio to justice. Moreover, the investigation raises important questions about international custody laws, the rights of parents in child custody disputes, and the enforcement of custody orders across borders. These elements would be explored in legal courses discussing international family law. The emotional reunion between Andrea and her father, Carlos, is set to be a moment of great significance. As part of the ongoing investigation, New Haven Police and the NCMEC facilitated a virtual meeting between Andrea and her father, which was a heartwarming moment for both. The plans for an in-person reunion, which will take place soon, have been eagerly anticipated by the public. It's expected that media coverage of this reunion will be extensive, highlighting the emotional significance of Andrea's safe return after such a long absence. Courses in family studies and psychological resilience would focus on the resilience of families like the Reyes-Cuverti family, who have gone through decades of uncertainty. The dynamics of Andrea's reintegration into her biological family would be explored, focusing on the need for therapeutic support to help both Andrea and her father navigate the complex emotions involved. The Andrea Reyes case demonstrates the intersection of law enforcement, technology, criminology, and psychology. From the forensic techniques that led to her identification to the emotional complexities of reuniting with her father after a 25-year absence, it provides an invaluable case study for various academic courses. This story serves as a reminder of the resilience of families, the power of modern science, and the emotional and legal complexities that accompany long-term abductions. On a quiet May morning in 1989, Barbara Lenn vanished from her apartment in Shenandoah, Iowa. There were no screams, no signs of a struggle, just silence. Her car would later be found abandoned in a different county, her apartment eerily untouched except for the small signs that something was deeply wrong. Her pets had been left without food or water. Her 3-year-old daughter, Lindsay, waited for a mother who would never return. For over 3 decades, the mystery of what happened to Barbara remained locked in a file, collecting dust. It wasn't until March of 2025 that the truth would finally break through, and the man responsible would be arrested and charged with her murder. Barbara was a mother, a friend, a daughter, a woman who had quietly fought to build a life for herself and her child. She was soft-spoken, deeply empathetic, and fiercely devoted to the people she loved. Born in 1958 and raised in the small town of Woodbine, Iowa, Barbara had a grounded upbringing rooted in kindness and simplicity. Her parents were hardworking and community-oriented, and they raised Barbara and her siblings to believe in decency, hard work, and responsibility. After high school, Barbara earned certification as a nursing assistant and began working in nearby Shenandoah. The job wasn't easy, but she embraced it with a quiet resilience. She had always had a nurturing nature, and those who knew her said Barbara had a calm way of caring for people, treating every patient with the kind of attention you'd give a loved one. At home, her world revolved around her daughter. Lindsay had been born from a previous relationship, and even though Barbara and Lindsay's father were no longer together, they managed to maintain a peaceful co-parenting arrangement. Barbara made sure Lindsay always felt loved, secure, and surrounded by warmth. That warmth was what made the shift in Barbara's life so jarring. In the late 1980s, she began dating Robert Davis, a man who on the surface appeared steady and charming, but whose temper simmered just beneath. Davis had also grown up in rural Iowa. His background was less stable than Barbara's. Though he held jobs in construction and farming, his work history was scattered, and his personal relationships left a trail of unease. People described him as charismatic in short bursts, but his personality could flip, at times controlling, possessive, and easily angered. At first, Barbara was hesitant to enter into another relationship, but Davis made promises. He wanted to be a partner, to help raise Lindsay, to offer Barbara the stability she had been striving to build. She believed him. Friends later recalled that Davis would bring her flowers unexpectedly, offer to do errands, and even sit through long shifts with her after work. But that charm faded as quickly as it appeared. The more time Barbara spent with him, the more isolated she became. She began pulling away from her social circle. She stopped visiting friends and avoided family gatherings. Some would later say she looked tired, worn down, not physically, but emotionally. Shortly before her disappearance, Barbara confided in a friend that she didn't feel safe anymore. She said she had been thinking about leaving Davis but wasn't sure how. She mentioned that he had grown increasingly possessive and that even small disagreements would escalate into something frightening. She was supposed to leave his house on Saturday, May 6th, to drive to Omaha and pick up her daughter from her father. But Barbara never arrived. When contacted, Robert Davis told authorities he had dropped her off at her apartment that afternoon, yet something about that never sat right. Her apartment didn't show signs of someone preparing to travel. There were no packed bags, no indications that she had stepped out voluntarily. Her pets, who she always made sure to care for, had been left without food. Her car, a brown Chevrolet, was eventually discovered abandoned in a remote area of Fremont County. Barbara Lenn's had simply disappeared. Suspicion quickly turned to Davis, and police questioned him multiple times. But without a body, a confession, or solid physical evidence, the case stagnated. Davis told different people different stories. To one, he insisted he had nothing to do with it. To another, he hinted that Barbara was gone for good. And to at least two people, he made chilling remarks, one involving a drunken boast that they'd never find her, and another where he said she was buried where no one would think to look. Despite this, the case eventually went cold. For years, investigators lacked the technology and resources to build a strong case. Witnesses were afraid to come forward. Memories faded. Files were boxed away, but the pain remained. For Lindsay, Barbara's daughter, the ache of that silence shaped her entire life. She grew up without answers, without a mother, and with a hole that no one could fill. As a child, she asked questions no one could answer. As a teenager, she became obsessed with piecing together what little information she could find. As an adult, she turned her grief into action. Lindsay used the internet to keep her mother's case visible. She wrote blogs. She posted on cold case forums. She reached out to reporters. She formed relationships with law enforcement and urged them to revisit the investigation. Then in the early 2000s, something remarkable happened. Robert Davis slipped. While serving time in a Nebraska jail on unrelated charges, Davis made a quiet, almost whispered confession to another inmate. He admitted that he had killed Barbara Lenn back in 1989. The cellmate would later recall how Davis spoke about her with chilling detachment, claiming he had done what he had to do because she was planning to leave him. Davis didn't say where Barbara's body was, but he made it clear that she would never be found. At the time, the jailhouse confession was passed along to authorities, but couldn't hold legal weight on its own. The case remained frustratingly out of reach. Davis served a short sentence for his unrelated crime, then walked free again, but the confession stayed on file, waiting for the right moment. And eventually, that moment came. In 2023, more than 3 decades later, that something finally changed. With renewed pressure from Barbara's family and new digital forensics capabilities, the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation reopened the case. They began retracing old interviews. Investigators used geographic profiling and timeline reconstruction tools, to remap Davis's movements in the days surrounding Barbara's disappearance. What emerged was a clearer picture than they'd ever had. One new witness came forward, stating that Davis had confessed to him in a drunken outburst years prior. Another described seeing Davis and his brother digging near a wooded area in 2005, on land Davis had once hunted on with Barbara. Law enforcement zeroed in on that property. Technological advances helped them identify inconsistencies in Davis's original statements. And by early 2025, they had gathered enough circumstantial and testimonial evidence to act. On the 20th of March, police arrived at Davis's home in rural Iowa. He was now 61 years old, retired, and married to someone else. The man who had lived free for 36 years while a family grieved quietly behind the scenes was arrested and charged with first-degree murder in Barbara Lenz's death. For Lindsay, the moment was as overwhelming as it was surreal. She released a short statement saying, "I just wanted her to be found, to be remembered, to be seen. He took her from me when I was 3. I've waited 36 years for this." As of April 2025, investigators are continuing the search for Barbara's remains. They are concentrating on the property where Davis was seen digging in 2005, hoping to bring not only justice, but peace. The case is no longer about the mystery of a woman who disappeared. It is now about the memory of a woman who lived. Davis is being held without bond in the Harrison County Jail, and he will be prosecuted in Harrison County. Roxanne Colleen Ledbeater's case is a tragic and mysterious chapter that remained unresolved for over 5 decades. It began on the 19th of November, 1973, when hunters near the St. Vrain River, approximately 4 miles west of Platteville, Colorado, stumbled upon skeletal remains. The remains, which were initially labeled as Jane Doe 1973, lacked any immediate clues to identify them. Investigators struggled with limited forensic technology in the 1970s, leaving them unable to determine the identity of the young woman or the circumstances that led to her death. With no matching missing persons reports and no leads to follow, the case quickly went cold. For nearly 50 years, the identity of this young woman remained a mystery. Despite periodic reviews of the case, there were no breakthroughs until advances in forensic technology rekindled hope. Over the years, as DNA analysis and genetic genealogy techniques improved, the possibility of uncovering long unsolved cases like this one became more feasible. However, the remains remained unnamed, and families of missing persons continued their search for loved ones, unaware that one of them might already have been found without recognition. In 2021, investigators reopened the case, and in April 2022, they exhumed the remains to obtain a usable DNA sample. With new forensic tools at their disposal, experts began analyzing the genetic material for potential matches. 2 years later, in February 2024, a breakthrough came when a forensic genealogy analyst from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation provided a report suggesting a strong likelihood that the remains belonged to 15-year-old Roxanne Colleen Ledbeater, who had disappeared years earlier. Roxanne, born in 1958, was from Los Angeles, California, where she lived with her parents and brother near Redondo Beach. She attended Glendale High School and was a typical teenager who enjoyed spending time with her family and friends. But everything changed one fateful day when her family noticed that she had gone missing. Roxanne had not returned home as expected, and her parents immediately began searching for her. As days passed without a trace, the family grew increasingly concerned. This was uncharacteristic behavior for Roxanne, who had always kept in touch. Fear began to settle in. Roxanne's family reached out to her friends, hoping someone might have seen her or heard from her, but no one had any information. Desperate, they contacted law enforcement, but without an official missing persons report, authorities were unable to assist. As weeks turned into months, Roxanne's family held on to the hope that she would return, but their anxiety grew. Unbeknownst to them, Roxanne's disappearance had gone unnoticed by law enforcement, and her case had never been officially documented. In 2024, with the DNA match to Roxanne's relatives, Investigators reached out to her surviving family members. However, they were heartbroken to learn that both of her parents and her brother had passed away long before the identification of her remains. Those who had once desperately searched for her were no longer alive to hear the long-awaited news. Roxanne's cousins, though not closely connected, confirmed that Roxanne had gone missing around 1972, aligning with the investigators' findings. Yet, troublingly, none of the California law enforcement agencies had any record of Roxanne being reported as a missing person. This discovery deepened the mystery surrounding her case, raising more questions than answers. In January 2025, the forensic genealogy analyst from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation officially confirmed the identity of the remains as Roxanne Ledbeater, based on a comparison between her DNA and that of her cousins. After more than 5 decades, her name was finally restored, and her family could begin to process the truth. Colorado Bureau of Investigation officials emphasized the significance of the case, highlighting how DNA technology had revolutionized the ability to solve cold cases. However, while the mystery of her identity had been solved, many unanswered questions remained. How had a 15-year-old girl disappeared without a trace, only to be found nearly 1,000 miles away in Colorado? Why was there no missing persons report? And who was responsible for her tragic fate? The investigation into the cause and manner of Roxanne Colleen Ledbeater's death is still open, as authorities continue to search for answers. As one mystery is solved, new ones arise, keeping Roxanne's case alive in the hopes that further investigation will finally reveal the truth behind her disappearance and death. The ongoing investigation underscores the importance of preserving evidence and leveraging advances in forensic technology to uncover the truth, no matter how long it takes.